And Kathy, you have two presentations back to back. And so we'll call this the Becoming Sessions, the Becoming Sessions with Kathy Frey. So this session is called Becoming Motherwise, Avoiding the Cascade of Interventions. And our next session, if you want to follow Kathy's journey, is called Becoming PIM Friendly Perinatal Integrative Medicine Practitioner Certification, which sounds like an acronym to me. And I'm an English professor, so I know acronyms. All right. So if you're ready, Kathy, we could start with an introduction. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think we might as well. We're a few minutes in, so yeah.
So again, we have a Q&A session, Q&A column, and a chat. So feel free to leave any messages for our speaker. So I want to welcome everybody here, seeing it in recorded or seeing it live. I'm really pleased to introduce all the way from New Zealand, Kathy Frey. Kathy Frey is a midwife who has been, according to my introduction here, New Zealand's #1 best-selling birth, babies, motherhood author since 2005. That's a good way to start. With its midwifery-led continuity of care, New Zealand is regarded as having the best maternity system on the planet. For example, as the only country that fulfills all the WHO's criteria for best maternity healthcare. Kathy is also founder of IIMHCO, International Integrative Maternity Healthcare Org, and they are global thought leaders on the perinatal integrative medicine. So Kathy, it's quite a bio as somebody with 4 kids. I'm really looking forward to hearing your presentation. So welcome, Kathy, and please take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Michael. And Michael and I just had a lovely little chat while we were in the green room. Because he's an English professor and my son is, well, my youngest son is studying to become an English high school teacher. So lots to talk about there. But look, welcome everybody. And I'm going to share my screen. And okay, Michael, can you see that okay? Yeah, great. Okay. Awesome. So look, thank you so much for those that have decided to come along here today, and I'm really looking forward to, I don't realize that back picture is going to move like that, but anyway, hope it's not too distracting. Okay, so yeah, what we're going to be talking about today is, I call it, nickname it, Becoming Motherwise, and basically the avoidance of that cascade of intervention. So, all right, firstly, however, I forgot that Michael would be doing a bit of an intro there, but just as a little bit of a bit more about who I am. So I'm a semi-retired caseloading self-employed midwife. So in New Zealand, we have sort of got rid of the term saying independent midwife, because there's almost something that could be contrived that you're a little bit rebellious, you're independent of the system. So we sort of tend to use the word self-employed. That means that you're caseloading. So caseloading means that we look after a woman from as soon as they find out they're pregnant, so right through their pregnancy, attend their birth, and then do postnatal home visits as well. And that's what we call that continuity of care. And then there's also, of course, we have what we call core midwives or shift working midwives who work in the hospital system. Okay, yeah, so this is my sort of local claim to fame, Oh Baby book, and it's rather thick, but anyway, so that's a book that has been New Zealand's top birth, baby, motherhood Bible since 2005. We really hardly do any kind of not a lot of sort of local advertising for it these days. It's just kind of sales or word of mouth. I've got women who tell me they've bought it 10 times for women's baby showers and things. So it is a little bit of a Bible here. And but interestingly, I wrote it before I became a midwife, because it is mother guiding mother. It's like a big sister or a friendly auntie type of perspective. And after I became a midwife and started catching hundreds of babies, then I did expand the labor and birth section on it. But principally, the book has not really changed because it's mother to mother. And I'm also managing director for MOTHERWISE.com, their resources and services, which I'll explain a little bit more about, and founding director of IMCO, which is the International Integrative Maternity Healthcare Organization. And we're global thought leaders on perinatal integrative medicine. And that is what the next session is about, where I'll be talking about how people can become PIM certified. And so we will, PIM meaning perinatal integrative medicine. Okay, I just want to apologize again for the swimming background. I do apologize if it's super distracting. I didn't realize it would be moving quite like that. So anyway, let's get on to it. So one of the things, I think we talk about, there's talking the talk and then there's walking the walk. So I want to give you my personal statistics, because then it gives you a little bit of an idea of what I've been up to. Okay, so if we look at my client base, so I am semi-retired now, but when I was a 24/7 on-call caseloading self-employed midwife, 50% of my clients were immigrants, so the English was their second language. 45% were PRIMIPs, 40% were advanced maternal age, and 40% had pre-existing medical conditions. So if anybody knows about caseloading, that's not the most appealing demographic. So statistically, of what's going to happen, we've got a lot of, complication and risk factors already sitting there with these women. But the outcomes for my caseload is that the average PRIMIPs active labour was 3 to 4 hours. The average MOTIPs active labour 1 to 2 hours. Around 40% of my clients would be birthing in a primary care setting, so that's a birth centre or a home birth, and about 60% would be birthing in a hospital, which is what we call secondary care facility. Less than 20% would have epidurals, which was primarily for C-sections and occasionally for an induction of labour. And 85% of the labours ended in vaginal births. So obviously a pretty low section rate there. And 90% were fully or exclusively breastfeeding at 1 month, and virtually no postnatal depression. Obviously, I would deal with women who came in with complications within their maternal health, but we would address those so well, really, leading up to that birth, that they were not suffering for, even with a history of mental illness or depression or anxiety, etc. We get them through and they'd be honky dory. So that's, I guess, is what is my takeaway message there. So obviously, also, please feel free to put into the chat whereabouts you're from, like, and your role. Maybe you are a midwife, maybe you're training, maybe you're a junior obstetrician, or I'd love to know whereabouts you are, what your role is, and do obviously feel free to put any questions into the Q&A section. And I'll absolutely make sure I get to them. Okay, so the cascade of intervention, what is it? I'm not sure how much I'm preaching to the converted here, but I'm going to sort of take it back to its basics. So there's a real flow-on effect that occurs, and if I'd got more technical with this PowerPoint, I would have had each point just coming in as I mention it, but I didn't get round to that. So you got a whole screen full of words, but we want to go through them. Okay, so the first thing that occurs within this cascade of intervention is that an obstetric decision is made to interfere. And that we need to stop at that point and really pose that question, you know, is the decision to interfere, is that a strongly indicated need? And we definitely do get to suffer from hospital culture where something is just, it's done that way. Sometimes it's because the more senior, older obstetrician consultants, you know, made that way a long time. And but we have to really question, why are we going to be doing this? And if there needs to be absolute certainty that it is the right thing to do, because once we hop on that cascade, that roller coaster, it's impossible practically to get off that journey, because one thing leads to the next. So you have to, for those of you who are coming into the role or are in the role as midwives, you know it's so important to advocate. And for those of you who are obstetricians or training to be, you know, please guys, it's about focusing on the normal. That is the first expectation, is that things should go normally, and we should only intervene when it is strongly medically indicated to do so, and not be doing this out of made to intervene. Traditionally, you know, we're talking about either an induction of labor or an augmentation of labor. So with inductions, of course, that's, you know, typically prostin, pervaginal, and, you know, artificial rupture of the membranes. You know, they can be in various orders sometimes depending on the culture of that hospital. Or there's that decision to augment a labor, and that, you know, and that may be by artificially rupturing the membranes. And of course, starting IV oxytocin. Now, because we have intervened, especially once oxytocin comes into the conversation, there tends to be this automatic pending conversation of need or recommendation of, oh, you know, we need to get the epidural on board, because there's an anticipation of the things that are going to have, there's going to be this intensity of contractions. Epidurals, we'll talk more about this, but epidurals would be the biggest harm potentially to accomplishing natural labor and normal birth. Well, you can't. So you can't do natural labor with them, and you certainly reduce your chances of normal birth. And there's other things that we can be doing instead of epidurals. The problem is that once that epidural goes on board, it's the first thing that it will tend to do is reduce the contraction length and strength and frequency. So if IV oxytocin is not already in situ, then we're going to need to get it pumping through the veins, because we want to increase the contraction length and strength and frequency again. So it's interesting. I'll tell you a little story, but quite a long, I don't know, a decade ago or something, quite a while ago, I had a midwifery student from Penn State University do her final clinical in New Zealand, and which was really cool, except what I would say is that it was kind of embarrassing that she would say that she was from Pennsylvania, and Kiwis would say, that's where the Dracula comes from. We're like, no, that's Transylvania, not Pennsylvania. But anyway, I hope you're laughing. But terrible ignorance on there. So the thing that I found was really shocking was that she was in her final, months of doing her clinical and had never seen a labor without an epidural. So it was a pretty exciting time for her. She had, her first home births, her first water births, her first hands and knees births, everything was practically a first. But then there did come a day when there was a situation where an induction was indicated, and it was the appropriate thing to be doing. And boy, I was amazed at her skill set on reading CTGs for continuous monitoring with an epidural and oxytocin drip up. Yeah, pretty phenomenal. So if there's one thing I guess that in the American situation, in birthing suite, you guys are probably pretty amazing at doing that, because she was very talented at reading CTGs. Not so great at being able to read normal labor, natural labor signs, because she'd seen so little of it. Anyway, so where are we now? Back to, so the fact that we've got the oxytocin drip on obviously turns this labor into high risk. And once it's high risk, that means that we need continuous monitoring, because we've got increased risk of fetal distress, etc. And on top of that, the woman it's not showing obvious signs of when she's having her contractions, so we need the CTG to see what's going on, or you're leaving your hand palpating, her fundus for hours on end, so you're not going to be doing that. And the downside, of course, is that the continuous CTG is going to be limiting her mobility, and the epidural combined with the limited mobility completely reduces her natural ability and her instinctual desire on how to mobilize. So when you see women in natural labor, they always are leaning forward, or pretty much always. This is the position, and that's because when you lean forward, the baby's back comes to the front, and that's so instinctual in them into lining up that baby into the correct position for it to be able to successfully descend. But we've lost that. So instead, so many of our women will spend most of their time lying back on their back. Like, it's pretty much apart from hanging a woman upside down by her ankles, lying her on her back is pretty much the worst position to help with her labor. Yeah, so okay. So then what happens, and the reason that that's one of the worst positions to be is a lot of it is gravity, and the fact that she's not leaning forward, because you want the pressure of that baby's head on the cervix. And if she's lying back, it's not happening. She needs to be upright and leaning forward. So we've got much reduced application of the head pressure on that cervix. So the cervix is not able to, it's not being encouraged to dilate as quickly as when she is leaning forward. Then, because she's not leaning forward and she's lying back, spontaneous fetal rotation, where, you know, typically in a good labor, the baby's, you know, LOL, and we want that baby to come OA. We want it to rotate around to the front, and it will with those leaning forward moves. When a woman is in natural labor, she does all the leaning forward, but she also does lots of rocking of her hips, you know, and rolling around. And this is so instinctual to help that baby move down. When now, if a woman with an epidural does get to the point of being fully dilated, actually dilated is the correct word, but everybody says dilated. So when she is at 10 centimeters, I'm not sure if your hospital culture is the same as ours, but traditionally what would happen is that woman would potentially have a top up of an epidural and crank on up the Synto and oxytocin and give that another hour or two of descent, because we want that head to be at +1 on the spines before she would be attempting to start to actively push. There is, evidence around the idea that if she's at 0 on spines and we start to push, it's less successful than getting that baby to that head to +1 before she starts to push. But of course, in a natural labor situation, she'd never have 1 or 2 hours of this not pushing. That she would have an irresistible urge to push, but she's not feeling that sensation. So that's if she does get to fully dilated. But of course, what also happens is that because there hasn't been that head pushing really, really hard on the cervix, we've got increased risk of failure to progress. So that's failure of dilatation of the cervix or failure of descent of the baby. And of course, when we've got failure of descent, we're talking about an obstructed labor, and that's most commonly caused because of some level of malposition of the baby. Typically, they haven't got themselves into their OA position because she's been lying back, and they haven't got the head really well flexed. Again, because she hasn't been doing all these leaning forward positions. The other big thing that, of course, happens is increased rates of fetal distress. And that's because the labor has gone on for so long for this baby. So much longer than a natural labor does. You know, you've got the time of like when we, if we just look at the pieces of time where the epidural goes on board, the contractions go bleh, then they has to start back up again with oxytocin. You've lost an hour or two there, but contractions have still been happening, so the baby's still been dealing with a labor. And then you've got this, 1 or 2 hours of passive descent when she's fully dilated, getting her to +1 before she starts pushing. And again, but at that stage, that baby's having some fairly ferocious contractions that are ramming its head, trying to force its head to flex, trying to get it to descend. So we have such higher rates of fetal distress. And that's why we need that continuous monitoring, because putting the epidural on board and having the oxytocin drips, we've created a high risk labor. And that's what I think many women coming into their first labor don't realize themselves. They don't realize that if they say yes to an epidural, that's going to lead to an oxytocin drip, and they are now in a high risk labor. We must bear in mind, epidurals were not designed for childbirth. They were designed for surgical anesthesia in a way that we could keep the patient awake, so they're lower risk than a general anesthetic. But they're something that's been adopted by obstetrics. And I'm not anti-epidural, okay? I'm anti-women not realizing the consequences of the epidural. It's about having informed consent. And if you don't understand the parameters of what you're changing, you're not really getting fully informed. So now we've got increased rates of failure to progress, which is either the dilatation is not got to fully, or the descent has, we haven't got that baby low enough to be pushed out by just maternal effort. So we've got, of course, obstructed labours completely and fetal distress. So they all lead to increased rates of instrumental deliveries, that's ventouse or forceps, and increased rates of surgical deliveries, which is your C-sections. Now, the fallout from that is the birth trauma, which is nothing to be taken lightly. And we do have, you know, more and more knowledge around this now. But that trauma that woman has dealt with can be just so huge, and it leads to such incredible levels of dissatisfaction with the birth. And dissatisfaction, or birth satisfaction, birth dissatisfaction, it really underplays that consequence, I think. You know, it sort of satisfaction, you know, oh, I wasn't satisfied that my salad had enough dressing on it. You know, I'm not satisfied that my birth ended as an instrumental or surgical delivery. I mean, the word satisfaction is not a big enough word, I feel, to express the level of trauma and regret and guilt and all these other complex emotions that get wrapped up into all of this. And we must remember that C-sections, although common surgery, unfortunately, it is major abdominal surgery. Major abdominal surgery. And it must never be seen as anything less than that. And in what other circumstance does a woman basically potentially have done the equivalent of running a marathon? I mean, that's the energy level that she's consumed and the hours that she's consumed. So she has just run a marathon, immediately followed up by major abdominal surgery, immediately followed up with giving her a baby and saying, hey, feed this every 2 or 3 hours. I mean, it's just, when we think about it, it's a crazy, crazy situation that we're putting women into. And you almost have to say, how can you go through that whole journey and not end up with postnatal depression? Like, those that don't, amazing, because it's such a huge thing that you've gone through. And of course that affects bonding, and it's all part of that hideous state of postnatal depression that so many women deal with. And it all goes back to the beginning of making that decision to interfere. And of course, there's complications with breastfeeding issues as well. You know, we know that C-sections slow down the arrival of milk, and the woman is just dealing with such levels of discomfort, and the babies are dealing with trauma. You know, when you've been sucked out or yanked out or cut out, and it's been after obstructed labor of your head banging, you know, against the cervix and a pelvis, or it's for fetal distress. I mean, the babies themselves are not, you know, I think a lot of them have just got a headache, and you see them just screaming. They're in pain. You know, so it's hard for the mum to feed the baby, and her milk's being slow to come in, but then it's hard for the baby to feed because they've got a freaking headache, and they're shattered. So put the whole thing together, and now we've got a woman who's not just dealing with the fact that her birth failed, if she, you know, particularly when she had a strong desire to have a normal birth, but now she's failed at breastfeeding as well, and you know, in comes the formula, and then it goes down the breast milk supply, and the baby bringing the breast milk on because it's sucking on a teat instead of sucking on a nipple. You know, the whole thing just turns in this messy mud pie. Okay, so cascade of normalcy. All right, so I'm going to go through the cascade of normalcy that I would take my woman through, and this is it's just such a beautiful thing to walk that journey with them. So firstly, naturopathic pregnancy support that promotes maternal wellness. So we are talking ideally, now that epigenetics has become more and more known about, and we study, it's a very new science, but we are starting to study that. So what we're talking about is preconception healthcare. But even if the woman has not participated in any preconception healthcare, there is definitely naturopathic support that she should be looking after herself with during her pregnancy. It's not just about going to see the obstetrician every time there's unwellness for the pregnancy. It's about also investing in the wellness aspect of it. So naturopathic pregnancy support ideally would take the form of two particular practitioners, and that would be one, a medical herbalist. So it doesn't really matter what qualification of medical herbalist that is, as long as they are qualified, but meaning that could be European herbalism, it could be Indian Ayurvedic herbalism, it could be traditional Chinese medicine, doesn't really matter. They all have various tinctures and wonderful remedies and supplements and things that will address what needs to be done. So investing in that wellness. So one, the medical herbalist, and two, a maternity acupuncturist. These things make huge differences to that woman's wellness, and we definitely see less cases of pregnancy complications, so less gestational diabetes, less preeclamptic toxemia, less growth restricted baby, and less in the wellness, and also advanced deep dive prenatal education, which I'll explain a little bit more, a little bit long in a few minutes. So what we do have to understand is that the level of prenatal education that most women are getting is very substandard to what they need to know. And also, once they get over 35 weeks, is utilizing partus preparatus, which is medical herbalism again for the ripening of the cervix. And you know, my one particular favorite product there is Nature's Sunshine is the brand, and they have a product called 5W, which stands for 5 weeks, because you take it in the last 5 weeks of your pregnancy, so 35 weeks onwards. Absolutely wonderful for toning the womb and ripening the cervix. A ripe cervix is what women need to get obsessed with in that last month of their pregnancy, or from 35, 36 weeks onwards. We want them to get super obsessed with ripening their cervix. All right, so then they will, after 37 weeks, start to enter latent labor. Now, latent labor, early labor, should last typically about 1 to 2 to 3 overnights. And this is all about the cervix getting softer and softer and softer, so that by the time she goes into strong active labor, it is unbelievably stretchy. And it's just going to open up so beautifully. All it needs is some fetal descent, and it's going to open up. Now, the 1 to 2 to 3 nights of overnight latent labor, this is again where their education is so important, because women, if they need to know that this is normal and natural and welcomed and what they want. In fact, you know, golden rule, the more nights of latent labor she has, the quicker her active strong labor will be. Some women don't have 1 or 2 or 3 nights overnight. Some women do go into strong active labor the very first night, but typically not with prime-ups. Yeah, so then we have the actual spontaneous commencement of the strong active labor, which of course should be defined as 3 to 4 contractions every 10 minutes, all over a minute long, that they can't breathe through. Once they've had 3 to 4 contractions every 10 minutes, all over a minute long, that they can't breathe through, and they've done that for a couple of hours or so, we're talking about a prime-up, then typically it's time to leave home and head into the birth centre or head into the hospital, depending on where they're going. And of course, with that strong active labour, they're going to have rapid cervix dilatation, because they've already pre-ripened the cervix, and they have already had 1 or 2 or 3 nights of latent labour. That cervix is so super ripe, not going to take very long to open up. And of course, there's only intermittent fetal heart rate auscultation required, because this is a low risk labour. But we want to support her with a huge plethora of natural pain management techniques. The idea that women want to have normal natural labour, but they don't get really well engaged ahead of time, working out, getting all the tools of the toolbox ready to be able to have as their resource. This is so important. So things like acupressure during the labour. Partners can easily learn acupressure points, homeopathy, incredible stuff, particularly in that second stage. Mobilization, breathing, massage, music's really important. Yeah, that can make and break a room. Meditation, we're talking about things like hypnotherapy. Hypnotherapy is basically meditative labour. A TENS machine, so transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation machine, where you just put the little pads in your lower back, and every time the woman has a contraction, she sort of turns it up, zaps the contraction. That works on the basis of the gate theory, where only one main message can get sent up the spine. It's a little bit like if you stub your toe, you want to rub your toe, because then that rubbing sensation overrides the pain. And it's the same thing with labour, that's a very good thing to be using. And of course, a dedicated birth support person, we know that makes a huge difference, not a husband that's sitting there on his phone all the time. And of course, hydrotherapy, so water, so that's hopping into a shower, hopping into the birthing pool. What I would say about hopping into the birthing pool in general is don't go in there before 7 centimeters dilated ever. We know that a sort of waterlogged cervix can actually take a little bit longer to dilate. And also it's really good to save the pool for when she's around about that 8 to 9 centimeters, when she's hitting transition into advanced labor. Save the pool for then, and then that will get her through, maybe with a little bit of nitrous gas if you've got that available as well. But typically the pool will be all she'll need if she's saved it till then. Okay, so and of course, now that she's had this quite quick labor, she's still got loads of energy on board, and she can do some fantastic, strong, effective pushing, making great progress. And there's not a lot of pain in that pushing stage, which I know everyone goes, what? No, it's pressure. Pressure is what she feels. You get pain with labor contractions, but with pushing, you get an irresistible urge to push because of pressure. There is a pain moment when the baby is just crowning. That's a little bit peaky, a little bit ring of fire, but it only lasts a minute or two or less. Okay, so with maternal exhaustion, you'll occasionally see that with women, particularly if they have had, 3 nights of latent labor. But easily remedied, typically with 90% of the time with 1 or 2 liters of IV fluids, or at least 1 liter IV fluids up. Just rehydrate that woman. She might have been sipping on a lot of water, but by the time she's in a strong labor, she's not really digesting. So it can all be just kind of sitting in her stomach. So some IV fluids is a great idea. And fetal distress, extremely rare, like super extremely rare. Yeah, and so now we've got way less birth trauma. In fact, no birth trauma. Fantastic, amazing levels of birth satisfaction. Like, she is stoked, and the baby's in such a great condition. It's just, it's practically purring. I'm not kidding you. Like, you would think if you were a cat, you would purr. You look just so happy to be born. Breastfeeding, fantastic, because the baby's latching well. She feels good. Amazing bonding, and again, practically no postnatal depression because it's just all gone so well. Okay, so now I want to show you this little bit of research that was done. This was done in my hometown, home city of Auckland, which is the largest city in New Zealand. And it was a retrospective study that was done with over 4,000 healthy, normal, low-risk women, and the difference of whether they were birthing in a secondary care hospital facility or whether they were birthing in a primary care birth centre. And pretty amazing statistics on this. Nobody expected the results to be quite what they were. So mothers were 4 times, so this is the ones that were in the birth centre in the primary care, they were 4 times less likely to have an emergency C-section. They were 1.5 times less likely to hemorrhage. They were 5 times less likely to be admitted to high dependency intensive care or the OR. The babies were 3 times less likely to have low APGAR scores, and the babies were half as likely to need admission to a neonatal unit, NICU or SCBU. And the primary reason conclusion was the inability to access an epidural. So the women that were in birth centres couldn't have an epidural because they're not in a major hospital, and so they coped. Basically, they got their head in a mindset, and they had their babies. Peter's a delivered strong woman give birth. That's a if there's one thing I can ask you, beg you, can you please take the word delivery out of your system? You know, we shouldn't have delivery suites, they're birthing suites. Women give birth. Obstetricians deliver babies, okay? If that baby is being sucked out, yanked out, or cut out, instrumental delivery, surgical delivery, that's a delivery. But a woman gives birth, okay? It's about preparing the mind emotionally and preparing the body holistically. It's about focusing on natural labor to support normal birth. Almost kind of winding up here. So I've got some resources for you. Okay. You want exceptional resources for your woman for exceptional results. You know, if you're going to do the normal levels of antenatal education, expect the normal statistical results of birth kind of thing. Okay. The first thing I'll talk about is organic birth 90-minute video. So this is a video I've put together, which teaches the secrets of natural labor and normal birth. It's put together for women, not for health professionals, but health professionals love it too. Now, accompanying that is a free download called the Organic Birth Download, which is a booklet basically for the birth support people. So I'm currently putting together, finalizing what we're calling the MOTHERWISE Masterclass, which is a premium online prenatal education program. Now, the organic birth video, if you go to the website motherswise.com or just kathyfrey.com and you look under the books and video tab, you'll see there the organic birth 90-minute video. But if you go under the free resources tab, that's where that free organic birth download is. Download it away for, get yourself a copy and give the link to, all your clients. Oh, and please call your woman clients, not patients. When they're healthy, normal women, they're clients. When they have some medical complexity to their pregnancy, they can become patients in a hospital. Okay, clients, not patients. Clients, not patients, and birth, not delivery. MOTHERWISE Masterclass. Now, this is a program that I've been working on for quite intensely in recent times, and I want to share it with you guys, okay? So if you email me, kathy@kathyfrey.com, and just let me know that you're in this conference, I will put you into a link, because I would like to give this course to you, not to all of your, to your colleagues, yes, but not to all of your clients, because eventually we like to sell it to the clients, because a lot of work's gone into it. But what I'd love to do is let you guys have access to it. And in return, all I'd really like is a testimonial feedback. That'd be really cool. But there's so much information there. And I would just really like to share it to you. I think that's the last one. I'll just see if I can click on this for you. Now, this page is changing, but okay. So if you can just see here, the course is in 10 modules, and this is the first. Each module takes around about 2.5 hours for the woman to complete, and she just does it in her own time. And of course, you can do the same thing in your own time. So these are all the topics that's going to get covered off in module 1. Then module 2, which is sort of so that's first trimester was module 1. Second, there's 3 modules in second trimester. Again, these are all the topics that are covered off. And then we've got the remaining 6 modules in the third trimester. And the whole thing, you'll also receive and actually this book as well, which is, I've got a few books, but this one you guys would probably adore too. There we go. Which is Oh Mama, and this is for health professionals. So it's a perinatal integrative healthcare birth practitioner guide to holistic maternal neonatal wellness. And that's all in this, okay? I'm giving it to you all because I just want to share it, all right? So will it get out of here? Stop sharing. All right. So that is, I hope that was helpful, everybody. I don't see any. We've got a couple of minutes left here. If you want to have any particular questions. The things I want to talk to you about. I want to rush through things. I mean, feel free to check out the kathyfrey.com, and there's loads of resources on there. As I say, particularly if you're training, or not even then, I mean, when you're well experienced, sometimes it's just great to have access to more resources that you can pass on to women, so women can feel more empowered and better equipped, and they can have a normal birth. One of the things, there's also a Facebook page. I'll just type this in here for you. Ask them. So if you go onto the Facebook page, Ask the Maternity Gurus, that is myself and an Australian obstetrician and an English midwife and some Australian naturopathic maternity experts and a bunch of other people. That's a volunteer pregnancy forum that we run for women, and so they can come on and ask questions, and we all contribute our time voluntarily to answering those questions. And we're not trying to replace good advice that they get access to. It's really helping those women who don't get access to good advice. We have a particularly huge following from the Philippines. And when you see the level of the questions that we get, sometimes I'm just scratching my head going, oh my goodness, is anybody looking after you over there sometimes? But we also do get a lot of Americans. That's our second top market after the Philippines. So feel free to follow that Facebook group as well, because there's just so many questions that come in and you're getting some really solid answers on it, and you're welcome to put questions in there yourself. So look, thank you very much. I'm going to wind things up here now because I need to get to another location for the next session. But just well done, you guys, for being here. And I hope that this has been inspirational, that we can do everything we can to help these women have fantastic birth memories and help these babies have non-traumatic deliveries. We just don't want traumatic deliveries. We want non-traumatic births. Yeah. Okay. So thanks, everybody. Love, and I wish you all well for the rest of this convention. And if you're ever in New Zealand, look me up. Okay. Bye, everybody.